The story of the Golden Fleece is very old, and the first time you hear about it in writing is in the 3rd century BC, and then, most notably, in the naughties BC when an epic poem was written about Jason and the Argonauts, which sadly for the author, who was only trying to break the contemporary boundaries of the time, received nothing but disdain from the critics, so the work was not successful. Today we're going to focus on the making of the fleece only, a fleece that once adorned the back of a winged ram that had been sired by Poseidon and the water nymph Theophany, the daughter of Poseidon, who was the son of Gaia and Helios. Theophany was so beautiful that she was constantly plagued by suitors, so when Poseidon, who we met in the previous video about Medusa, set eyes upon her, he kidnapped her and took her to the island of Criniса. The suitors followed, so in order to confuse them, he turned Theophany into a sheep, and himself into a ram, as well as all the other inhabitants of the island, who he also turned into sheep. The suitors were not to be deterred and began to slaughter all the animals on the island, so he changed all of them into wolves. His child with Theophany was a winged ram with a golden fleece. Meanwhile, the founder and king of Thessaly, Athamas, took the nymph Nephele as his wife, and they had 2 children together, Phrixus, a son, and Helle, a daughter. However, over time, the eye of Athamas began to wander and soon rested on a Theban princess called Ino, daughter of Cadmus, one of the very first Greek heroes in mythology before the time of Hercules. Nephele was very angry and left Athamas and the children never to return. Ino went on to have 2 sons of her own with Athamas, but it was clear that he continued to favour his eldest son. So Ino hatched a plan to get rid of the other 2 children so that her own 2 children could become his favourites. She spoiled all the seeds in the land so that the crop for the next year failed, and in desperation the farmers appealed to the local oracle for advice on what to do. Ino ensured that the advice that returned was that Zeus, who'd created Nephele as a cloud nymph to distract a suitor from Hera, was very angry at the way she'd been treated, and to appease his anger would require the sacrifice of his son, Phrixus. Athamas sadly agreed that this would have to happen. However, before he could do the dirty deed, Nephele sent the golden ram with wings and instructions to Phrixus in a dream that he and his sister should mount the ram and escape their fate. Phrixus did as he was told, and soon enough he and his sister were flying on the back of the golden ram, who told them never to look down. Sadly, though, Helle did look down, and when she did, she slipped off the back of the ram, fell into the sea, and drowned. The area of sea where she fell has since been called Hellespont, and is at the entrance of the Dardanelles. Phrixus, tired, clung to the ram as they continued their journey, which ended in Colchis, which today is in a region in the country of Georgia, and the king Itus took him in and married him to his daughter. Phrixus then sacrificed the ram and gave the golden fleece to the king in gratitude. The soul of the ram rose into the sky and became the constellation Aries. Ino did not get off scot-free in this story, as later on she would be in charge of her nephew Dionysus, which made Hera jealous. Hera, not known for rational behaviour, struck Athamas with insanity. Athamas then proceeded to hunt down and kill one of his sons with Ino, and when he succeeded, Ino, in fear, took the other son and jumped into the sea to save him, never to be seen again, and later then became a deity called the White Goddess. The alternative ending is that Hera struck Ino with madness as well, whereby Ino cooked the other son in a cauldron before trying to drown herself in the sea, and a sympathetic Zeus prevented her by turning her into the White Goddess. As for the Golden Fleece, it was placed in an oak tree protected by a fire-breathing dragon who never slept, and there it stayed until a certain someone came and took it. But that story is for part 2 of this mini-series, so stay tuned. The story now moves to Iolcus, where King Pelias had killed his brother and entire family to take the throne. I say the entire family, but actually his nephew Jason survived and was sent to the centaur Chiron, who was unique among centaurs in that his origin story was with the Titans, where he was abandoned as a baby and then adopted by Apollo, which resulted in Chiron receiving a stellar education from the gods, making him first among centaurs. Well, anyway, I digress. When Jason was 20, he returned to Iolcus as the rightful heir to the throne. Pelias, who was warned by an oracle that a man with one sandal would take his throne, recognized the threat of Jason when he presented himself at court with one sandal missing. When Jason made his demand, Pelias set him the impossible task of getting the golden fleece from the oak tree in Colchis that was protected by a dragon that never sleeps. If Jason returned with the fleece, Then the throne was his. I think everyone probably thought it was going to be the last anyone would see of Jason until. Enter stage left, the crack team of heroes. If you're going on a quest, you really couldn't ask for a better bunch of people to turn up and support you. A team that included Hercules, Castor and Pollux, Cetes and Calais, Orpheus, and various other hunters and slayers and generally good men. No one ever explains why this group of men came together, but I suspect it was more about the support for the lineage of kings, which was essential for social stability, than it was about Jason himself, as they immediately voted in Hercules as the leader of the quest. Hercules, being a gent, declined and quite rightly said that it was Jason's quest, so he should lead. I suspect that Jason was a less than inspiring character when they met him. Either way, they set off on the ship Argos, hence their name, the Argonauts. Their first stop was the Isle of Lemnos, where the women there had killed every male adult, child and baby because Aphrodite had made the women smell bad for their neglect of her temple. So the men went and lived with the slaves, angering the women into a violent act of revenge. When the Argonauts arrived, though, the smell must have lifted, as love matches were immediately made, and Jason was first among them, leaving only Hercules to watch the boat. After quite some time had passed, Hercules became impatient and called them all back, reminding them that they were on a quest that had not yet been completed. So the men dropped their women, leaving many of them pregnant, jumped on the boat and continued on their journey. Their next stop was the Doliones, who received them well and stocked them up with food and water for their journey. But before they set off again, Hercules had a run-in with a group of 6 armed giants that lived nearby, and he killed them all. So once he'd wiped the blood off his blade, they were all ready to set off again. But they got lost and ended up back at the Doliones in the middle of the night, who then mistook the ship as an enemy attacking, perhaps in retribution for the giants Hercules had killed. A battle ensued whereby the king of the Doliones was killed before anyone realised the mistake. His wife later unsubscribed from this world in her grief, adding to the tragedy. After apologising and staying for the funeral, the Argonauts set off again and to their next stop, where a friend of Hercules was abducted by a water nymph. When Hercules went off in search of him, Jason and the Argonauts left without realising he wasn't on the boat. A big argument broke out when it was noticed that Hercules, their best fighter, was missing, for which Jason was blamed. But a sea deity came to his rescue, rising from the deep to let them know that it was the gods who were to blame, and with that the crew calmed down and the journey continued onwards. Next they stopped in Thrace, where King Phineus lived. Zeus was angry with Phineus because Phineus had the gift of prophecy, but was giving away too much information. So to teach him a lesson, he made Phineus old, blind, and set harpies upon him to steal his food and torment him. Jason and the Argonauts took pity on him and released him from his torment. So in return he gave them the key to get through the clashing rocks, which they had to pass through to get to Colchis. So when they got to the clashing rocks, they released a dove to fly through the gorge first and followed it safely to the other side, arguably the first sailors to ever successfully pass through. Finally, they arrived at the port of Colchis. Jason anchored up the boat and went and asked King Aeetes for the Golden Fleece. Needless to say, Aeetes refused. What happens next will be in the next video, so stay tuned for part 3. I have to be honest here and say I don't think Jason was the sharpest spanner in the toolbox, and this may be why the others wanted Hercules to lead the quest. Jason makes me think of what it's like being a teenager, where you know it all, but really you're just fumbling through life from one accident to the next, thinking successes are planned and failures are everyone else's fault. So we find Jason and his friends on the shores of Colchis, and he is contemplating how he's going to go about getting the Golden Fleece. As he does this, Hera and Athena are watching and keen to help, so they hatch a plan whereby the daughter of Aeetes, Medea, falls in love with Jason and helps him get the fleece. To do this, however, they need the help of Aphrodite. When Hera goes to see Aphrodite, she finds her lamenting her parenting skills of her young son, Eros, who seems to be paying no attention to her and won't do as he's told. Hera gives some parenting advice that works, so Aphrodite in gratitude gets Eros to fire off a couple of love arrows to get things going between Jason and Medea. Jason then decides he'll just go and ask for the fleece from the king through the king's grandsons, who happen to be in his crew. The king, in a rage, says no, but keen to avoid a battle, he instead demands Jason complete 2 impossible tasks. If he completes them, he can take the fleece. During this visit to the palace, Jason meets Medea, and they both become love-struck by the arrows of Eros. And as Jason departs for his ship, her heart becomes torn in anguish between her love for Jason and her father. That night, Medea tries to find a way that she can help Jason without compromising her reputation or angering her father. She breaks down in despair, catching the attention of her sister. So Medea explains that she's worried about her sister's sons, who are with Jason and sure to perish if he should fail the task that had been set for him. Medea's sister gets frightened and asks Medea to help them. Medea was a high priestess and a powerful witch of Hecate, the goddess of witches, crossroads, and black dogs, and who now had all the permission she needed to get involved. So she arranged for a secret meeting with Jason behind the temple of Hecate the night before the two trials were to begin. At the meeting, he professes his undying adoration, especially if she helps him, and suggests that she sail away with him. She hands over the magic that will help him, and she parts from him, making no commitments. The next day, Jason's first trial is to plough a field with fire-breathing oxen, which, with the help of Medea's magic, he manhandles the oxen to do his bidding. His next trial is to sow the teeth of the dragon, and when done, they sprout soldiers that he then has to kill, which he manages to do using a trick Medea taught him, which was to throw a stone amongst them, and it will cause them to fight each other. As a result, Jason completed his tasks, and Aeetes knew that Medea had helped him. Medea decides to flee, but not before she helps Jason steal the fleece by putting the dragon to sleep. Jason takes the fleece back to the Argo, exulting in its sheen like a young girl who has caught the moonbeams in the folds of her gown. Aeetes is furious and sends 2 fleets of ships after the Argos to get the fleece back. One fleet went through the now motionless clashing rocks, whilst the other fleet followed the Argos in hot pursuit up the Danube River. Finally, they find their way to what is now known as the Adriatic Sea, where Medea's brother, who is leading the Colchis fleet, finally manages to corner them. Peace talks ensue, and it's agreed that Jason can keep the fleece since he legitimately won it. However, Medea had to face trial for her treachery, with the local kings sitting in judgment. Medea didn't trust her fate to the strangers and hatched a plan whereby she lured her brother into a trap and got Jason to murder him. They dismembered the body and distributed the parts, avoiding the retribution of the Furies. The fleet, now leaderless and outmaneuvered, didn't want to return empty-handed to Colchis, so they disbanded and settled in the area that they had found for themselves. Zeus was not happy with what Jason had done, so he sends them a stormy wind that takes them up the river Po and finally into the Sea of Sardinia. It is there that they find Circe, a famous high priestess and witch of Hecate, who absolves the couple of blood guilt through an elaborate ceremony appeasing Zeus. The boat experiences good sailing from here and manages to successfully pass the Sirens, with the music from Orpheus to help, and they only ended up losing one member of crew who leapt overboard, never to be seen again. Finally, they arrive at Drepani, known today as Corfu, where they meet the other fleet of ships from Colchis. The king of Drepani mediates and later tells his wife that he intends to send Medea back to Colchis unless she is married. The wife immediately lets the lovers know, and so they immediately get married. One wonders why they hadn't gotten married before, but I suppose they were rather busy. So this fleet now decides that they would rather stay and settle than go back to Colchis empty-handed as well. Unfortunately for the Argonauts, however, another storm blows them off course, and this time onto a sandbank just off the coast of Libya, unable to sail north again. Whilst all lament their fate to die, Jason is visited by 3 nymph guardians of Libya who give him instructions on how to survive. They must carry the boat across the desert to Lake Triton, and when they arrive, they hear that Hercules had just been there the day before, but has since departed, and so he won't be able to rejoin them. Triton, another sea god and son of Poseidon, then reveals the route that they must follow to get to the sea and eventually back home. Jason finally goes to claim his throne, but once again is rebuffed, so Medea hatches a new plan. She invited the daughters of the king of King Pelias, who watch her as she chops up an old goat, puts them in a cauldron, and chants a spell. To the astonishment of the daughters, a young goat jumps out of the cauldron and trots away looking for food. Immediately they begged Medea to do the same for King Pelias, as he was old and they would like to see him young again. Medea agreed and told them to do exactly as they had seen and to call her when they were ready for her to do an incantation. Sure enough, the girls chopped up their dad and put him in a cauldron and called Medea, but when she arrived she just laughed at them for being so stupid. For such a dirty trick, both Medea and Jason were banished forever, so they went to settle in Corinth, where they lived together for about another 10 years, popping out a fair number of children in the process. At this point, things with Medea get a little hazy, as there are a number of versions floating around. The most exciting of which is that Jason decided to marry the princess of Corinth, so Medea sent the princess a poisoned cloak that killed her and the king when he touched it as well. Medea then kills her kids and runs off to Athens, where she marries the king of Athens and has a son. But when his other son appears, she then murders to plot him, but the plot fails and she flees to Colchis, where she helps her father get his throne back, having lost it to his brother. Jason, for his part, he did finally manage to win his throne back and give it to his son, but he died a lonely man, having incurred the wrath of Hera for his treatment of Medea. He died being crushed by the crumbling hull of the Argus. I think the story really speaks to the fate of relationships being defined by their beginnings. In this case, it was a chemistry match, and from the get-go, they're conspiring in deviant behaviour, like stealing the fleece or running away, and killing people, including family members. This chemistry and collaboration keeps them going as the body count increases, but it seems that once all the excitement is gone and they finally settle down and pop out a few kids, Jason loses interest in her, and for her part I suspect she doesn't quite know what to do with him either. I think it's unlikely that she killed her kids though, and this may have been an embellishment of a playwright or a poet over the ages. One ending says that Hera promised them immortality as a reward for Medea refusing Zeus's advances, which seems like a more likely but less exciting for the audience. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. Please leave a comment and let me know what you think about the love story of Jason and Medea. Do you think they had a just ending?